I also see Marla Williams here. Welcome, Marla. I'm so glad. And Ruth and Ann, I'm so glad you're with us. And it will be fabulous to be together today with Brad Laughlin. I know those of you who know of him, and mostly those of you who know him, know what a treat you are in for. So, hello, everyone. This is Dr. Marj Brett. I'm the founder of Living Loving Legacy and also of Called by Love Institute. And I am so thrilled and excited that I'm going to be in dialogue, in conversation today with one of my timeless friends.
Mm.
And probably more than anyone else I've ever talked to, when Brad and I are in conversation, I can literally feel the shift of going from time into timelessness. And that is a rare, rare gift. I don't feel that with hardly anyone, especially after my move to Kansas City from California, where there were some of those timeless people. Haven't found as many of them here, one or two, but it's an interesting experience to live life as it is, realizing you live in multiple realities simultaneously. And a phrase I've often used and still am learning how to dance it, dancing all the colors of the rainbow. So there's the dancing coming in, dancing all of the colors of the rainbow. And today's beautiful, beautiful guest um, is someone that does that, someone that lives that. And we are going to talk about the first act of his life and then um, shift maybe for a minute or two, not long, because this is his call, not Leslie Temple-Thurston's, but I'm sure Leslie Temple-Thurston is with us today. I know that she journeys in these realms that are time beyond time and space. And I know that I do, and I can always feel it. And I know you can too. So she'll be with us today, even if she's not visible. She's in the invisible. So we may touch on some of her story because the story that Brad and Leslie share is a timeless love story. And we'll be going more into that. But first of all, I want to do the invocation. And this is an invocation actually that begins with some of the words written by Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity. I am in the presence of pure being. I am immersed in the Holy Spirit and in the life and love and wisdom. I acknowledge this presence and this power and the Holy Spirit. And I give myself my mortal limitations into that, this pure substance of love, as we bring forth the manifestations into this world according to Spirit and God's perfect law. And so it is. Slight modification in some of the words, just being with what comes and realizing that we are going to be going beyond words today. One of the questions that I ask myself as I knew we were going to have this call between Brad and I, this conversation about time and the timeless. Where will we begin? And how will we describe this journey that's beyond words? The subtitle to Brad's book, which is the last one that he's written, is A Journey Beyond Words. Love is timeless and eternal. It's a journey of the soul where the soul descends into time and into soul love. That means that it's invisible as well as visible. And so we'll begin by talking about Brad's life. And Brad, what a joy it is to have you here today. So we're going to just start with talking about the first part of your life, childhood. And I know you're visiting your parents right now. and if I'm remembering, Jim and Sandra.
Good memory. Look at you.
Well, you've mentioned some of these things I've from different sources, our many conversations over time, and
Yeah.
also in your book. And I've read your own book, the one you wrote about your own life, cover to cover, and highlighted and underlined
Mm.
and folded corners back on page. And are they the ones that own the condo in Florida where you?
Yes, you did read the book.
Well, let's talk about the culture you were born into. And where were you born? The state?
I just want to start by saying thank you, Marj. Thank you for inviting me. I mean, I really I honor every single interaction I ever have had with you. We've known each other for so long, and I've
A
watched
decade.
your,
No, a quarter
uh,
of a century.
yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And you, I've watched your work blossom and grow. And so I just want to honor our connection and thank you for having me on your show. So,
Oh, you're welcome. I'm so
yeah.
delighted. It's just such a joy to be able to talk about a quarter of a century of our
Yeah.
lives and knowing each other. And
Yeah.
um,
Mutual. It's mutual.
yeah. So one of the great things that you told me one time is that I was the first person that invited you to speak by yourself.
Yes. That's that's right. That was phase two of life. So maybe we'll talk about that in
We
phase two of
will,
life,
but let's jump back to phase
huh?
one right now. So
Okay.
where were you born? What state?
I was born in Charleston, West Virginia, United States. And we lived there for about 3 or 4 years. We moved to southern Louisiana. So I lived there for about, I think, 6 or 7 years. Is that right? Uh, maybe, anyway, I was about 10 when we moved from there to New Jersey. Yeah, so we moved to New Jersey and I went to high school here in New Jersey. And the irony is that I'm actually visiting my parents in New Jersey. They live in the same house that they've lived in since 1973. They're in their late 80s. And I get to come visit them once a year or so. And I happen to be here. You're the first person to ever ask me about my parents and my childhood. So the irony of it all, that here we
Isn't
are.
that amazing?
This rather the synchronicity of it all.
So
Yeah.
how would you describe the culture of your parents? Uh,
Uh, my parents are some of the most loving people that I've ever met on the planet. They raised me with a lot of love and support. So I feel very blessed. And it's a very middle class, upper middle class, whatever you want to call it, upbringing, typical, kind of a normal childhood, I suppose, if that exists, normal. Um, and yeah, I was encouraged, to do well in school and play sports and date and all the kind of normal things. And so that I don't know, there's not a lot else to say. I could go on about it, but I think that suffices. There was nothing extraordinary about my life other than what I've come to realize is the love of my parents was extraordinary. And I feel like they taught me how to love. And they demonstrated that. In fact, this Friday is their 66th wedding anniversary.
Wow. That's a lot of loving.
Many years of love, yeah.
Oh. And were there any surprises in your childhood?
Oh, yeah, this is the maybe the biggest thing I could talk about in my childhood. Um, I was gay and living in a, suburban middle class culture back, in the 70s. It was way before gay was cool. So this was not.
How did you discover that? It just an inner feeling, and you said, "Oh my God, I must be."
Yeah, it's hard to describe because I knew from a very young, looking back on it in retrospect as an adult, I look back on it and see I knew from, age 4 or 5, from when one starts becoming conscious, really, and having memories. And so I remember, being attracted to men. And that's just the way it was. And then I quickly learned, it was nothing overt, but, you hear the occasional comment and you learn quickly, oh, I can't be that way. That's not okay. And so some part of me, I look back on it and I realize some part of me thought, there's something wrong with this picture. I'm not sure what, but this isn't going to go very well.
And so you may, in fact, have come in to be part of dissolving some of those boundaries.
I definitely see it. I
Mhm.
definitely see it that way now. That I know that was I when I came out of the closet in the first phase of life, so we might as well talk about that. I started coming out of the closet in my early 20s. Um, and it was the hardest thing ever at the time. I would say there were probably 2 or 3 things in my life that have been the hardest of all, the most challenging, and that was one of 2 or 3. Um, and I wished I hadn't been born. It was that hard. It was just so hard to get real with myself and to really look in the mirror and be honest and say, what am I doing? Who am I? And what is this about? It forcing, when I think it's true for everybody, I'm sure everybody can relate to this. It's those moments in life where we're forced to look in the mirror and get real and start that's when we start asking the bigger questions. Why is this? What, who am I? What do I need to do about this? What does it mean? And, and it takes a lot of courage for anybody, obviously not just coming out of the closet as gay or bisexual or whatever, but, when we're pushed into stepping out of the mold and being truthful about who we are and how we feel, uh, it takes enormous courage to be that one who's different from the rest, right? So again, I wished at the time that I had never been born. I wished I even thought about suicide at times in high school. It was that difficult. I never acted on those thoughts. They were just sort of fleeting thoughts, but still, it was that difficult that I didn't want this thing, whatever it was. And now looking back on it, I wouldn't trade it for the world because I see that it's the life lesson is that our greatest challenges are also our greatest gifts.
Yes.
Right. And I like to call them FGOs. Some you may have heard that frickin' growth opportunities, right?
I'm having a few of those right now.
Oh
And
yeah.
I'm in my 80s.
Oh, I don't think they stop.
Well, let's look at that young adult period of your life before age 25 when you went to college and uh, and tell us a little bit about that. Where was it? I know you have a degree. Uh,
Yes. I went to Duke University and graduated with a degree in electrical engineering. And yet I was really good at math and science, but I absolutely loved the arts. I loved languages. I loved liberal arts of all kinds. I especially loved theater. I had always uh, I was in the chorus, and I always was an actor, doing stage theater in high school and college, and I just absolutely loved it. It was when I really came alive. And so my first 2 years of college, I was the manager of the Duke basketball team. So if there are any basketball fans listening, that was, it was the first 2 years of Coach K's career at Duke. And he went on to become one of the winningest coaches in any sport around the world. So it was a remarkable time for me, and I had to find the courage to step away from that and do something different. So when I was a junior, in college, I started my third year in college. I started uh, doing theater and absolutely loved it. And then when I graduated, I thought, okay, life's over now.
Where did you graduate?
I graduated in 1984.
So this first headshot that I have of you was a headshot that was taken in, I think if I remember from your heading on it, 1983. So that may have
That's
been,
right. I did. Well, here's what I'll tell you about that. So, in when I was in summers in college, my junior and senior year, I was doing some modeling, and that particular shot was not for acting; it was for modeling.
okay. I love the picture. It's wonderful.
Thank
You're
you.
so handsome.
Oh, you're too kind.
I just
Seems like
recognize handsome men.
seems
Still
like
do.
many lifetimes ago. Yeah, I look at that picture and I think, wow, who was that?
Yeah.
So much water under the bridge. So
Yeah.
yeah, so the quick version of the story, since you're getting into some of the details, I might as well share. So I graduated, I got a job with Westinghouse Electric Corporation, and the best part of it was they said you can go anywhere in the country you want, and they had offices all over the place. And I had always dreamt of going to Los Angeles, California, and I loved theater. I loved film. And I just thought, oh, wow, to go to Los Angeles. I'd always lived on the East Coast. I didn't know what that would be like. And, you
Hollywood.
know, that's right. That's right. It was sort of like a dream to be out there and, see what that's all about. And I was so miserable in that job that the words I would use to describe the job were soul destroying. For me, it's not, I mean, not everybody feels that way, it's great for some people, but for me, it was definitely not my calling. And I did that because it was what I thought you were supposed to do. Get a career, stay in your lane, follow that path for many, many, many years and earn a steady paycheck and have, a known source of income. And I was so miserable that this was the time when I also started coming out of the closet because I was finally in a city where, I could explore myself, and that included exploring my sexuality. And I started realizing like, oh, I really like men. And I had always dated women, I'd always thought, there was a part of me that really thought that when I met the right woman, I would know and I would get married and have a family. And that was just sort of how, I remember asking my parents about that. And that was kind of, the advice was, yeah, I would say, well, how will I know when I meet the girl I'm supposed to marry? And they say, well, you'll just know. You'll just know. And when I started realizing I was attracted to men, I thought, something's not right with this picture. What is this? And so those early 20s, the years of my early 20s, they were a time of really questioning and understanding who I am. Uh, yeah, so I got up the courage not just to come out of the closet, but also the first closet I came out of was to quit that job and to start acting. And I had a friend at the time who said, well, he would see me miserable all the time. And he said, well, you used to be an actor, didn't you? Why don't you come to my acting class with me? And I thought, oh, fantastic. And so I started taking acting classes at night with a really wonderful teacher. And I credit that acting teacher with being uh, really my first spiritual teacher. What he taught me was that if you want to be a good actor, you need to learn what motivates you. Because if you don't know what motivates you, how are you ever going to understand another character and what motivates them? And how are you going to play them if you don't know your own truth? And so that was the key. And I look back on that time and I realized like that was the beginning of my conscious spiritual journey as well, because it was when I started looking in the mirror and getting real with myself and saying, who am I and what motivates me? And it was that process that made me realize I need to start coming out of the closet because I can't live a dual life. I can't have a hidden part of me. Especially your sexuality is so integral to your life. So that was leading up to age 25. It was all happening, in that first quarter, as you call it, the first
The
stage.
first act of your life. So
That's
let's
right.
go into that second act of your life.
Yeah.
And uh, actually, we may circle back and just take a couple of minutes to talk about Leslie here and the first act of her life.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say when I speak about my life, I actually have to talk about Leslie, as I think you're alluding to, because um, we, as I don't want to jump ahead too far because that's part of the story, but Leslie and I had a soul destiny together, and it has shaped the rest of my life, since that time, since I met her, and for her as well. So the first phase of Leslie's life is that uh, she was born in South Africa during apartheid. If anybody doesn't know what apartheid is, it was the world's most intense form of legalized racism ever known. Um, and a horrible, horrible situation that she couldn't wait to get out of. She tried to change, to do her part to change from within, to help change the country from within. And she just thought this is a waste. I can't make a difference. In fact, she once said to her spiritual guides, you know, uh, uh, what can one person do? And they said, we will show you what one person can do. And so that's part of her story. It wasn't the first act of her life, but she started a spiritual journey that was in the second phase of her life that part came, and we'll get to that. So to finish with the first phase, she got married to a doctor. They had two children, and then it was
They were his children or Leslie's children?
they were their children.
Their
They
children.
had, yeah, yeah. Tony was his name, and Leslie had two kids, but they were their biological children.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So then we'd have to go to the second phase of her life. We might as well do that right now.
All
So
right.
she started her spiritual journey, and at about that late 20s or so, somewhere around there, That was the time when apartheid was at its height and the rebellion really began in full swing in South Africa, the revolution. And it was very unsafe, and they were helping as much as they could. In fact, they were protesting such that the special branch, so-called, which is sort of like the secret police, they were following them and they raided Leslie's house, Leslie and Tony's house, and it was a very, very bad, dangerous situation. And as fate would have it, their prayers were answered. They wanted to raise their children not in South Africa, and uh, through a series of miracles, the the uh, the medical program that Tony was a part of in Johannesburg was offered by UCLA, offered a scholarship. When I put my thumb up like that, you get the little icon there. I don't know why. Uh, so yeah, so to make a long story short, they emigrated. Tony got a scholarship to go to UCLA to become a surgeon, and he actually went on to invent a significant hip replacement surgery. And so what happened was they emigrated to the United States and they lived in Los Angeles. And that was where Leslie, she had already learned to meditate in South Africa. She started with transcendental meditation, TM, but then she started a more committed spiritual path when she arrived in the United States. And she started having spiritual awakening experiences. And she started in, I'm backing up a little bit, in South Africa, she started hearing her spiritual guides speaking to her internally, which is what we call Claire, clairaudience. So Leslie was clairaudient. She could hear her spiritual guides speaking to her inwardly. And that intensified when she started her intensified spiritual path in Los Angeles. And one thing led to another, and they got a divorce because their paths were diverging. And Leslie experienced she had an enlightenment experience in the late 1980s, in the second phase of her life, when she was about 40 to 42 years old. And she essentially, the ego dissolved and never returned. And she looks back on that time. It's a whole story, and it's part of my book and it's part of her book, that story, which it might take too long to tell the whole story. But essentially, it was an experience of enlightenment, and it was after 2 years of what she calls a cave experience, where she just essentially meditated almost all the time for 2 years and rarely left the apartment except to get food. Ironically, that apartment was in Los Angeles at the confluence of two major freeways. It was a very busy, dirty, noisy area, and yet she had her enlightenment there. So she always thought enlightenment needed to happen in a cave in the Himalayas. And she was given a cave in the middle of a busy city near to near the confluence of two freeways. So, spirit has a sense of humor. Uh, yeah, so she had her enlightenment experience in 1988, and students started appearing at her doorstep. She never let anybody know. She never really talked about it, but the word started getting out that, hey, you can meditate with that lady, and you get an energy transmission that's very transformative and healing and uplifting. And so people just started coming by word of mouth.
And where were you at this time?
I, let's see, I was in Los Angeles from 1984 to 1989. So we were in the same city, but we didn't meet each other.
And how did you happen to meet?
So what happened to me, if you want to just go into some of the details, what happened to me was to go back to my story where we left off, when I really started getting real and asking the bigger questions. Who am I and why am I this way? And what does it all mean? I quit acting. I had achieved like a certain, like some goals that I had set for myself with acting. Had always wanted to be on a soap opera and do commercials, and I did those things. And the sort of the shine, the luster on that whole thing wore off. It was sort of getting very old. And when I started asking the bigger questions, because I had been raised in the church, my parents were Episcopalians, the Church of England. And so because I was raised in that church, I thought I need to go study theology. That's where I'll find the answers. So I left Los Angeles and I went to divinity school. I was accepted to Yale Divinity School, and I thought, this is where I'm going to find the answers I'm looking for. I was so excited. And I lasted one semester. Not even. Not even one semester because it was not what I was looking for. It was a very mental experience, and I couldn't have described at the time what I was actually looking for, but I knew that wasn't it. In retrospect, I can see that it was just a lot of mental gyration trying to understand something that's actually unfathomable, something that must be experienced rather than understood mentally. And so at the end of that semester, I became very disillusioned. And I'm going to make a long story short. I eventually learned that I should learn to meditate. And so shortly after divinity school, I learned to meditate. I went to Vipassana Buddhist Center in Massachusetts, and on my 28th birthday for a 10-day retreat, silent meditation retreat, and I had some blowout spiritual experiences. I was having visions in meditation with my eyes closed. I actually had an experience of the breathless state. If I don't know if anybody is aware of what that is, but it's where when you're meditating so deeply, everything calms down and relaxes so much that what happened for me was my heart stopped beating and my lungs stopped working. And I went into this very, very deep, expanded spiritual state that's known in the East as samadhi. It's a state of unity consciousness. And so I experienced that, and my life was never the same after that. When I came out of that experience and then out of having the visions and then coming out of the 10-day meditation retreat, I knew that my life was going to be following whatever that was, that path that obviously needed to include meditation. Having no idea what else it would include, I just knew I needed to meditate. So, fortunately, I was in a position where I didn't need to work for a year, and I spent that year basically meditating. I meditated morning, afternoon, evening. I would sometimes meditate 8 hours a day, and I just really went through massive change. Um, and I was on to answer your question, Marge, how did I meet Leslie? So I went on a vacation from Connecticut. I went back to Los Angeles, and this would have been 1990. Uh, and I was introduced to, and as fate would have it, it was Gay Pride weekend. So we're a Gay Pride weekend coming up here. So this was a vacation to visit the Gay Pride parade in Los Angeles. And I wound up, a new friend said, "Why don't you come to my meditation class with me? You might like my meditation teacher, Leslie Temple-Thurston." And I said, "Sure, why not?" And I had an experience. I sat in the meditation it was 12 people in a funky little house in Culver City, California, and in a funky little neighborhood. And we were sitting in a circle of just a few people, Leslie across from me. And she said, "Let's meditate." We all closed our eyes. And for the first time ever, I was able to feel her doing energy work. And even though her physical body never left the chair, and even though my physical eyes never opened, I could see her. And I watched her going around from person to person, working on their energy, working on their aura, their chakras, doing things. And I just marveled at it. I was in a deep meditation, so I didn't think about it. I was just watching, observing, and I remember thinking, this is unbelievable. How's this happening? How am I aware of this? How is she doing this? And then when it came my turn, she built a giant ball of light in her heart, and she sent it across the room to me, and it entered my heart, and it was so intense. It's impossible to put words to it, but what I would say is that it siphoned the air out of my lungs, and I couldn't breathe, and I went into an ecstatic state. I couldn't think, I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe, and I literally sat there in this ecstatic spiritual state, speechless, um, not knowing what to make of this. And she said, let's take a break. She gave a talk. I have no idea what she said. And then she said, let's take a tea and cookie break. She's very British that way, British South African. Let's take a tea and cookie break. And everybody got up and started walking around and talking. And I remember thinking, who are these people? How can they move? How can they talk? And I eventually opened my eyes and I looked across the room, and there was Leslie sitting there. And she said, come, sit next to me. Tell me about your experience. And I went up to her. I could barely move. And I got over there and I sat down and I looked at her and I said, I could feel you. She said, yeah, that's how it works. I work with energy and I send this healing transmission of energy to people. And this is what, and she explained a little bit about it. And the long story short is I left there that night. Fortunately, my friend drove because I couldn't drive. And I thought, this lady, she has everything I want. This is like one-stop shopping. I went back to Connecticut the next day. I packed up, and in 3 weeks, I was living in Los Angeles. And I'm making a much longer story short. There's a lot more information in there, but it was an answer to a prayer. I'd been making a prayer for a long time that I wanted somebody like her. I was reading Yogananda's book, Autobiography of a Yogi, and I thought, I need this guy, but I need him alive because I want to ask him a million questions. And I prayed for a long time to get that guy, but alive. And I know that I was sent to Leslie because she had those answers I was looking for.
Yeah. And it's amazing. So now you're back in Los Angeles and you're back working with Leslie. And you're living in Los Angeles and you're beginning to develop what eventually will become retreats. And interestingly, in those early days before she wrote with you as her support system, the first book, and that was about living, enlightened living in today's world. Um, I went to Unity of Tustin in 1993, and you
Uh,
were teaching in Santa Fe part of the time, and I loved Leslie's teaching. I could feel it in her voice. And the Unity minister there had introduced me to tapes. And ultimately, I invited you and Leslie to come to Unity of Tustin. And you came in 2000. And Leslie signed her book for me. And
oh.
look at how I have bookmarks in it and pages underlined. And she signed it for me, and her signature is just something I treasure. That I was able to meet Leslie at this point in her life, and become one of the people that was part of her world. And so it's very, very fascinating to me And I don't know when you had this picture taken of you and Leslie, but
That
this
was 2010,
2010. So
much later.
picture is a little bit later. The book was published in 2000, or um, the it's interesting because all of these dates sort of blur, and we actually put pictures of all of the books in the email. You have to scroll down to see those in the email, but we put them in sort of a reverse order. And at first I objected. No, they didn't come in this order. And then what I realized is it's like spirit descending.
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
reverse order.
Timelessness, right?
Timelessness. So the marriage of spirit um, came first, and then you came to Unity of Tustin, and that was when she signed my book. So tell us about your move to from Los Angeles to Santa Fe, and just briefly,
Yeah.
and how that began to evolve into ultimately the forming of Core Light, which was very soon after that, the nonprofit. And
Yes.
this was going to change your life even further.
Yes. So that's another sort of big part of the story, which I'll just make brief. What happened was when I returned to Los Angeles to live there and to study with Leslie, I was her student. She was my spiritual teacher. And I was always knocking on her door. I was always calling, saying, "Do you need any help? Can I come over and help you in some way?" And it was a great excuse to learn from her and to be, just be in her field. And eventually, after about a year and a half, what happened, and again, long story short, we had just bonded so deeply, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, that the invisible hand sort of kept corralling us in these situations where we both eventually realized that we were to start a physical relationship. And so we became partners. I need to explain this part of the story. This is how we, to answer your question, this is how we came to move to Santa Fe. So we we essentially started a relationship. We consummated our physical relationship, and I realized the humor, that the cosmos has a sense of humor because it was so hard for me to come out of the closet, only to realize I wasn't as gay as I thought I was. Ah, oh, I should have been upset probably, but how could I be upset? So it was the humor of it was not lost on me. And we started a physical relationship. Literally, that first morning we woke up together and we said, "Oh, now what?" And there was no plan. We sort of felt like, well, the energies are just coming together. It might last a few days, maybe a few weeks. Let's check in every morning, because we were not looking for a relationship. Our And this is an important part of the story, so I just need to tell this part, and that is that our commitment, each of our individual commitments, were to our spiritual journeys, not to each other. I was focused on my own awakening, and Leslie had already had her awakening, but she was focused on helping other people to awaken. And we were both focused on service, essentially, to put it in a nutshell, to serve the earth in some way, to help the planet, to help make the world a better place, let's say. So we committed to remaining in a relationship as long as it served each of our highest spiritual purpose. The commitment was not to each other. It was to stay together as long as the relationship served each of our highest spiritual purpose. So we said every morning we're going to check in. And if we get a yes on that, we'll stay together that day. And so that continued for a while. Every day we'd check in and we'd get yes, yes, this is serving our highest spiritual purpose. We'll stay in a relationship today. And that lasted a long time. It got a little tedious to check in every day. And so we said, all right, let's check in once a week. And then that also, we always get a yes. And that got a little tedious after a few months. And we said, we'll check in once a month. And so we did that for a few years. And then eventually, like, we realized, all right, we're in this relationship. Let's check in once a year. And then, 30 years later, some years we'd forget to check in. Anyway, so Leslie had been invited to go to Santa Fe to lead some darshans. A darshan is a meditation or an event where there's meditation, and she gives a talk and gives a transmission of light and energy that is healing and uplifting. And she was invited to go to Santa Fe. I was not her partner yet. I came with her to support the event, but it was one of those moments where we were corralled. And so Santa Fe holds a special place in our hearts because that's where we started our relationship. And so we eventually moved from LA to Santa Fe. It was 1993. And we moved into a house and we lived in that house for almost 25 years. And so that phase, as you say, it was an important phase. It was when we were starting our nonprofit. We created a nonprofit called Core Light, corelight.org, which supported the spiritual teachings. And we ended up, you know, we never advertised. It was always organic and by word of mouth. But the teachings spread, and we started traveling around the U.S. and eventually to other countries to teach. Uh, and we wrote books, and there were a lot of audio. Leslie created a lot of audio courses and single audios, and taught many events, including at Unity of Tustin, which was one of our favorite places to go to be with you. And yeah, so 25 years later, it was a whole body of work and a school essentially that was created.
One of the moments that stands out for me was when I think it was the first time you came there, and my beloved friend Michael Ward was in the retreat. And he has many times talked about how he was sitting there with his eyes closed and meditating, and all of a sudden he feels her gaze. And he opened his eyes and she's looking right at him. And so gazing was one of the ways she connected with people and actually transmitted the energy to them.
Yeah.
And it changed their lives. So it's absolutely fascinating. He's now in India,
Ah,
half time, and working with the Mother Miracle School on their board of directors.
oh, beautiful.
Just amazing ways that people's lives were transformed from her presence, her
Yes.
her gaze, and so
Can I just interrupt you for a moment? I need to
sure
say
can.
that situation you described, where Michael opened his eyes and she was gazing at him because he could feel it, that is not uncommon at all. I've heard countless people, and including myself, I was always very aware of when the energy was being directed at me. It was either through her eyes or her hands. And it also comes through her voice, so you can still get it through her audios. You can still feel the transmission if you're sensitive. You can sit and receive the Shakti. The Shakti is what's the healing energy is known as Shakti. And yeah, so it was very easy for people to feel her, whether, she was transmitting to a few people or hundreds of people. You could feel the wave of Shakti passing through or being directed right at you.
Yeah. One of the things that I wrote down in realizing we were going to have this conversation is that you and Leslie together were to be a bridge from the old into the new paradigm, about this shift, this paradigm shift that is birthing in the world. And you were to be part of that. And so now what we realize is in your third act and fourth act, all of the time actually dissolves into timelessness. Age difference doesn't matter. Gender preferences have dissolved. You're deeply in love with a woman who happens to be, how many years older was she than you?
Oh, I forgot to tell that part. 16. We were definitely an odd couple. And by the way, I need to also say she resisted tremendously the relationship. It was she told me later after we started our relationship, she said, "You know, my guides told me months in advance they were going to give me a partner." And she wondered who it would be. And she said, "One day they pointed to you, Brad, and they said, 'He's the one.'" And she said, "Oh no. No, 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 no. We're not doing that. He's a student, he's gay. You got to be kidding me. Forget it."
And actually, you've lived and worked with each other for more than 25 years, a quarter of a century,
So over 30 now, yeah.
39 years,
No, over 30 now. Yeah.
over 30 now, with unconditional love in your relationship and intimacy and deep love and ancient, ancient abiding. And
Yeah.
at the end of the email, there were two pictures. Before we jump to those, let's actually, I'll jump to it now because there was
Could I recommend, I know what you're going to say. Maybe I should just tell the story first and then you show the pictures. Is that
great,
okay? Because
great.
it's the pictures are the punchline of the story. So I'll tell it briefly, but it's a story. It sounds remarkable, but I think it's true for all of us that, this story shows that we each have a soul destiny. And mine just happened to be revealed to us in a physical way through these pictures you're talking about. And it's fascinating. It was shocking to me when it happened. But what happened was when Leslie's father died, her father and mother lived in Johannesburg. We had to go to Johannesburg and help her mother to find a place for assisted living. And we had to clean out their house. And I was cleaning out a closet and I found this very old painting. And it looked like me as a little boy. It had blonde hair and blue eyes. And I thought, what is this? And I said, "Leslie, what is this?" And she said, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe my mother saved that. I painted that picture when I was 15 years old." Um, Leslie was an artist, by the way. I didn't tell you that part, that she was an artist. She always painted abstracts and landscapes, never people. But she went through a period of great illness when she was 15. And I'm going to make a long story short, but she went into essentially a coma. I think it was called rheumatic fever, and you can die from that. So she went into a coma. She was in a very bad state, but she survived. And when she came out of the coma, her mother gave her paints and paper as she convalesced, she could make art. And she painted this picture of this little boy with blonde hair and blue eyes and a blue shirt. And her mother said to her, "Oh, that must be your brother." Leslie had a little brother. But she said, Leslie's mother said, "But your brother doesn't have blue eyes, he has green eyes." And Leslie said, "That's not my brother." And her mother said, "Well, who is it?" And Leslie said, "I don't know who it is. It just came through me." And she had no words to describe it. And her mother just wrote it off and just said, "Oh, it must be your brother." And so she saved it. So I said, "Leslie, you were 15 years old. Like, what time of year was it?" And she thought about it and she said, "Well, I remember school was just ending and whatever, whatever." And I said, "You mean it was May? May, and that would have been 1962." And she said, "Yeah, it would have been May of 1962, early May of 1962." And I said, "Leslie, that's when I was born." And I need to tell you that my parents, when I was 9 years old in 1971, they commissioned a local artist to paint me and my brother and sister with pastels. And the painting that that lady made of me looks just like this one. And we kind of looked at each other. And I said, Leslie, I think you left your body and you came to West Virginia in your etheric body and you helped my mother with the labor because some part of you wanted to know that I was being born because we had decided as souls before we incarnated that we were to be partners. And we had already started Core Light and written books at that point, and so we kind of like were, oh my God, could this be true? And there's no way to know. But I did show Leslie the picture of the portrait that my parents had commissioned, and we compared it to the other one. So you can show that picture now to see the similarities.
This is the two pictures side by side, and it's in your email. And it's just
Yeah.
an incredible, incredible story. And just a knowing, and that this is the invisible coming into time. And one of the things that you wrote is that this relationship and this experience over this lifetime has given you more inner fulfillment, more spiritual wealth, more rewarding work, more fulfilling relationships, and amazing unanticipated adventures.
Yeah, that's true.
I love that description. So tell us about whatever you want to touch on in the next few minutes, because
Right.
we're moving toward the period of time when Leslie decides to retire.
Okay. Yeah. I guess there's so much to say, and I wrote a lot about it in my book, Living with Enlightenment. So if anybody's interested in more of the stories, it's a book of stories. It's just that my stories of being on my own journey, mostly with Leslie. It's sort of like my experience of having her teach me and being in relationship with her and all that I learned from that. And I would say, one of the biggest lessons, apropos of what you just read there, Marge, I think one of the biggest lessons that applies here in my life is leap and the net will appear. Because how do I say this? I guess for anybody, when we have a deep inner knowing that something is right for us, very often it's challenging to just jump into that. And for me, it started with coming out of the closet. And then it led to quitting my job and acting. And then it led to, going to divinity school and then to, being in my relationship with Leslie and all on and on. But it's sort of like what I learned, I guess, is, when you have that deep inner knowing, that's when you can safely leap and the net will appear. The way that I'm sure a lot of people know how this works, if anybody's experienced this, and that is, you stand at the edge of a cliff and you look down and you see certain death below, and it's scary. But you know that if you jump, the net or the invisible hands will appear, or you'll sprout wings, whatever you want to say. And so, what most people, I think, do is they look at that situation and they say, show me the net and then I'll jump. That's not how it works. You have to jump first and then the net appears. Um, and, life eventually, I think, corrals us to the edge of that cliff. Uh, and eventually, in the beginning, we have a lot of wiggle room, and there are many other things we can do while we wait and get the courage to jump off the cliff. But eventually, the corral becomes smaller and smaller and smaller until there's nowhere else to go except off that cliff. And that's where that spiritual lesson of leap and the net will appear comes in. We have to remember that that's how it works. First, you leap, and then the net appears. You're not shown the net first, usually. Uh, so, yeah, I would say that's one of the bigger spiritual lessons that's applied to my life, I think I can say I've been very blessed that I learned that lesson early. And so I've been able to have many lifetimes within one by learning to jump off a cliff and have the net appear. And I know sometimes, a life can just be about one jump, and that's enough. So it's different for everybody. That was my path.
One of the things that you've said, which I just love, is that a new person, with new and person both capitalized, there's a new person that is birthed, and the old person simply drops away,
It's
dissolved.
That's it. And I think that's another spiritual lesson we can bring in here that's very important. What I learned early on, and I learned this from Leslie. I had learned it before Leslie, but she put it into words. And what she taught me long ago was that we are not our thoughts, we are not our emotions, we are not our personalities, we are not our bodies. We are pure awareness, and the thoughts and emotions pass through us. We tend to, it's this lesson about identity. We think we are these things, and we take on an identity. We say, I am an artist, I am gay, I am tall, whatever. We've all got our identity, and that is not who we are. We are a soul having a human experience. And so I think what becomes clear is, if one is on a committed spiritual path, it's a series of dissolutions and rebirths where we dissolve aspects of our known identity at the time. It's known as ego dissolution, right? It's also known as shadow work. It's also known as making the unconscious conscious. But whatever you like to call it, that's what we teach at Core Light, is that path of how to make the unconscious conscious, how to look at those aspects of ourselves and dissolve them, and then rebirth into a new self. And I think the key to this is that we hear those words and a part of us is afraid, like, oh, dissolve. I don't want to dissolve. You the ego is synonymous with control and status quo. The ego is wired for survival, and the ego, therefore, wants to remain the same at all costs. And so we can gently support the ego and remind the ego that it's not death. The ego fears it's death, but it's not death. It's a graduation. It's literally just a morphing into a bigger self, one that is more fulfilling, one that is more whole, one that is more in alignment with our whole spiritual purpose for being here. And so this path of learning to go through ego dissolution after ego dissolution and being reborn into a self that is less identified with the limited ego. That's the key, I think, that you're referring to there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and what I realize is that in many ways I've taken this journey with you simply
Yeah.
because I've followed you and I've listened to your calls and know about your life, and you've gone through a huge shift recently.
Yeah.
Uh, and Leslie is now living in South Africa full time. This is the most current picture that I have of you and Leslie. This may have been sent to me in one of your personal emails.
Yeah.
And tell me about this time of your life.
So let's see. I need to make it a little bit succinct because it's worthy of another book. But it's been I would say, the most challenging phase of my life. And that is that about 10 years ago or more, Leslie started losing her memory. Her mother had Alzheimer's, her mother's father had Alzheimer's, and the disease, there's a hereditary aspect to it most of the time. And so Leslie was prone, she was at greater risk for it. So she started losing her memory, and again, it's a much bigger story. But in the end, well, what do you think, Marge? Should I talk? This is one of the biggest spiritual lessons of my life, so maybe I could talk a little bit about it if you
You
like.
can.
We have time for that.
Yes.
Okay, so I do need to make it succinct. I don't have time to tell the whole story, but let me see what I can do. So I felt um, this is challenging. This is I've talked about it only a couple times in public, and it's been very short. I haven't told the whole story, and there's not enough time to tell the whole story. So forgive me, please, for uh, hesitating here.
Let
Um,
spirit direct it.
yeah. So as you can imagine, when she started losing her memory, it was very, very challenging for me. Our lives were shaken up and turned on their heads, and we had to cancel all our events. And I, the long story short is, I realized that I needed to. Well, I tried to get her all the help I could. We took her to the best neurologist, functional. Dr. Perlmutter is his name in Florida, and he wrote a best-selling book called Grain Brain, which he was one of the first people to connect cognitive decline or cognitive health with diet. And a friend of mine said, "Here, you should read this book." And I realized we needed to go meet him. So I got Leslie an appointment with Dr. Perlmutter. He's a functional medicine doctor. Functional medicine, if for those who don't know, is it's a Western medical doctor who who doesn't just treat symptoms but looks for the root cause of what's going on. And so Dr. Perlmutter is one of the leaders of the functional medicine movement in the world. And so we went to see him, and he said, I have good news for you today. Well, first of all, Leslie failed every test. When you go to see a neurologist, they give you a little series of tests like what year is it, what month is it, what day is it, what country are you in, what state are you in, what city are you in, etc. There's more. And Leslie failed every single test. She didn't know what year it was. She didn't know what country she was in, etc. Uh, and he said, I have good news for you today. You can get your memory back. He said it was just proven last month. This was 2014. It was just proven by scientists. They've done studies. They used to believe that if you ever lost or damaged any part of your gray matter, it was gone forever. But he said they just learned with a certain protocol, you can grow back one part of the brain, and it's called the hippocampus, and it's responsible for short-term memory. And he said, look at your hippocampus. We did an MRI of her brain, and you could see, he said, look, your hippocampus is the size of a pea. Look at a normal brain. It should be the size of a walnut. And he said, so you can grow that back. You can get your memory back with the protocol. And we were like, well, what's the protocol? And he said, it's called exercise. And he said, if you're on a certain diet, it's called the keto diet. It's much more popular now. A lot of people know what that is. But if you're on a keto diet, it was new at the time, and you do 20 minutes per day of cardiovascular exercise, you can grow back your hippocampus. So the very next day, we were out there, you know, walking fast, pumping our arms, or swimming, or biking, or whatever we were doing. And it's about getting your heart rate up. It's not just about walking or doing housework. You got to get your heart rate up and get puffed a bit. And so within 3 to 4 months of doing that, of being on the keto diet and doing the 20 minutes a day of cardio, Leslie got her memory back. It was a miracle. We started teaching again. We did 3 retreats in South Africa at our center there. Um, New students didn't know anything was wrong at all. Older students knew something was different, but they weren't quite sure what. So fast forward a little bit, a couple months later, after those retreats, and for the first time ever, Marge, in our you know, at that point, it was 25 years of being together in a relationship. For 25 years, we were together 24/7, 365. It wasn't a normal relationship where people separate from time to time. Leslie and I were literally together 24/7, 365 for 25 years with rare exception. And for the first time ever, there was an imbalance in the relationship. And I realized there was a problem because I was doing everything I could to help her stay in the body. I was, you know, there's that thumb again. I was having to, manage the food, the exercise, the run the organization, like do everything. And I was doing too much and it was killing me. I was not doing well physically. And Leslie, one day when I said, "All right, come on, let's go. We're going to go do our 20 minutes now." She looked at me and she said, "No, I've decided I can't live this way anymore." She had pain in her knees. She never really liked exercise. She really didn't like to sweat. It was hard, and the diet was hard, for her. She liked a different kind of diet. So she said to me, "I've just decided if I'm going to die of this disease one day, I need to do it on my own terms. I'll do the exercise when I feel like it, but not every day. If I need sweets now and then, I'm going to have sweets." And I begged her, I said, "Sweetheart, please don't do this. Please don't go this route because just 6 months ago, you didn't know what year it was. You didn't know what country you were in." And she said, "Nope, I've made up my mind. I can't do this anymore." And no matter how much I begged and pleaded and cajoled, and over months, you can imagine, I tried everything. I tried humor, I tried logic, I tried emotion, I tried manipulation, I tried anything I could. And she was resolute. She had decided that that was not her path, that she couldn't and didn't want to do that. And at a certain point, uh, and again, I think the pain in her joints and all of it was that was part of it to her, it's difficult to describe this because when I tell the story, it doesn't do the whole thing justice, but I hope you'll understand that there was a lot going on here. And it was difficult for me and for Leslie, both of us. And no matter what I said, no matter how I pleaded or whatever, she just kept saying no. And at a certain point, I realized it was no longer about her. It was about me. That I was trying to hold her in her body and I was trying to keep our lives the same because it was so wonderful and it was so magical and fulfilling for both of us that I just wanted it to continue. But then I really came to realize, this is not about her anymore. It's about my process. And I'm trying to hold her in her body, and I need to let her go. So once I made that decision, I really started, it was the beginning of a grieving process. And I spent many years going through deep, deep grief and letting her go. And again, there's a big story here. I'll tell a little bit more of it because I think this was my biggest lesson. Um, so so what happened was I knew that I needed to go away and have time by myself to heal myself. So I put a lot of care in place for Leslie in Santa Fe. I had a lot of volunteers ready to help, and I booked a plane ticket. My parents had an empty condominium on the beach in Naples, Florida, beautiful place. And we used to vacation there as children, so it was like heaven for me. Um, white sand and palm trees on the Gulf of Mexico. And I went there. I booked a plane ticket to go there. Right after I booked the plane ticket, I started doubting myself, and I thought, this is crazy. This is my beloved in her hour of need. I'm not going to leave her. And so I started praying. And I said to my spiritual guides, I'm not getting on that plane unless you give me a very, very clear sign. I need a sign. And I waited and waited and waited, and no sign came. And I thought, all right, every day I talked to my guides and I said, I'm not getting on that plane. You better give me a sign, if you want me to. So a couple days before I'm supposed to get on the plane, I still have all the care in place for Leslie. I had a channeled reading with a friend of mine. Her name is Lina Bernson. She's very, very clear trance channel. And I asked these very these spiritual guides it's a very clear, it's like talking to your higher self. And I asked the guides, I said, look, I this is the situation. Do you have any advice for me? And they said, well, you need to follow your heart. If your heart's telling you to get on the plane, get on the plane. We can't tell you what to do, but here's what we can tell you in case it's helpful. They said, we can tell you that your soul agreement with Leslie is complete. And it's no longer your job to care for Leslie in the way you have. You can give Leslie back to us and we will care for her. And I thought, oh, that's beautiful. That resonated as true. And I thought, that's wonderful. But it's not a sign. I'm still not getting on the plane. And and so the next morning, I was sitting over coffee with Leslie and in the living room, and I said, I've got to tell you what just happened. And she said, I want to hear, but I had something happened to me too. I've got to tell you this right away. And she said to me, I've been so worried about you going away. Um, and I've asked guides about it, and they finally spoke to me this morning. Ability to care for Brad in the way you have. You can give Brad back to us and we will take care of him. So it was the exact same words as the channeled reading. And I thought, that's the sign. That's the sign I needed. There's magic afoot here. I can get on the plane and it's going to be okay. So for the first time, this was 2015, I got on the plane and I went to Florida to be with myself for the first time in, 25 years or whatever. And and I spent I allowed myself to just do whatever I needed to do every day. And most of it was grieving. Some days I would just cry most of the day, beat a pillow, scream into a pillow, whatever I needed to do. Um, I started writing our story. Every morning I would sit. I knew I needed a creative outlet, so I would write, and I would just write down all the wonderful, magical stories of my time with Leslie. And after a few months, I realized oh wait, each of these stories could be a chapter in a book. So that's how my book evolved, was from writing those stories down. Um, anyway, the long story short is I started a year and a half over. It was between a year and a half and 2 years. I did this commute. I would go to Florida for a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever, and then I go back to Santa Fe to be with Leslie and to care for her. And we would talk on the phone every day. So it was still togetherness, but at least most of the day was me getting to be with me and caring for myself. And I realized I was not well. I was really not well. Like my health was very poor, in fact. And so I started doing self-care with diet, exercise, and healing regimen. So anyway, fast forward, Leslie's slowly declining, but she's got a lot of support around her. And um, at the end of that time, I realized it didn't make any sense anymore to have our house in Santa Fe and our house in South Africa. So we decided to sell the house in Santa Fe. But before I left Florida to go back and sell the house and emigrate with Leslie to South Africa, um, I had another channel reading with my friend Lina. And I said, all right, look, there's been this whole experience. I'm a brand new person. Um, do you have advice for me? And they said, yeah, as a matter of fact, we want to tell you that, you know, You could have stayed in Santa Fe to be Leslie's primary carer. And if you had stayed, you would have done it out of very noble reasons. You would have stayed out of a sense of love and duty and loyalty and things like this. But we can tell you, if you had done that, two things would have happened. Number one is you would have left your body before Leslie left hers, because it's not your soul's purpose to be her primary carer. You're supposed to be a teacher. And if you had left, you wouldn't be living your soul's purpose. So you would have found a way to check out. It's easy to leave the body, and you would have found a way and you would have left. So that's number one. Number two, the other thing that would have happened is that you would have denied the person whose soul's purpose it is to be Leslie's primary carer. And that's my friend Kellyanne. My dear, dear friend in the world, Kellyanne Conway, told me early on when I first started going to Florida and I put care in place for Leslie. Kellyanne called me and she said, you know, she lived in Sacramento at the time and had a whole career as a sound healer and a life. And she called me. She said, I keep getting this feeling I'm supposed to uproot my life and be Leslie's carer. I'm supposed to come to Santa Fe and care for Leslie. And I said, come on down because I know that's not me. And so during that time I was in Florida, Kellyanne was stepping in as Leslie's primary carer. And so I I I could have stayed and been Leslie's carer, but I would have denied Kellyanne what she knew was her soul's purpose, was to be Leslie's carer. Kellyanne said to me, I think I'm supposed to remain with Leslie till she takes her final breath. And sure enough, that's what's happening. You know, that was back this, I'm telling you a story that we sold our house in 2017. So for the last 8 years, Leslie and Kellyanne have been in South Africa, and I'm there half the year. But I know that I need to keep Corelight moving forward, which is actually what Leslie asked me to do. Before she lost her memory enough, she said, please take Corelight forward in a new way. And she handed me the metaphorical baton. And so one of the biggest lessons of my life, the spiritual lessons, is, we have to learn to discern between what the mind is telling us and what the heart is telling us. Because my mind was telling me, you should stay and be Leslie's carer. She's your beloved, like I wag my finger at the camera because that's what it felt like. I was shoulding myself. You should do this out of duty and loyalty and love. And those are wonderful things. And for some people, I know many people who are the primary carer for their spouse who has dementia, and it's their soul's purpose and they love it. My heart was telling me, no, it's not. But it was one of the hardest cliffs to leap off of. Jump and the net will appear. It was one of the hardest ones of my life because I didn't want to do it, but I knew that my soul was calling me in another direction. And so I share this with everybody. I haven't really shared this much at all. It's even a bigger story than I've told, but it was a profound lesson for me because it taught me the importance of learning to listen to the heart, even when it's confusing. I thought it was my heart calling me to stay with Leslie, but in the end, I look back and realize that it was so much coming from a concept of what one should do. So to wrap it up, I know we're at the end, but what happened was, I know that I made the highest choice for my soul, and Leslie is happier than I've ever known her to be. She is in a place in her life where she's more joyful than I've ever known her to be. With the enlightenment came a certain level of joy. She always had a deep inner peace and joy. But this is different. This is like exuberant, playful, childlike, pure, and it's constant. She's living in the eternal present moment and joyful all the time. So it's become this kind of oddly, it's this win-win where she gets to experience that. And obviously, for whatever reason, her soul was calling her to that. Before she lost her memory fully, she said to me when she passed me the baton, she said, you know, I know that we chose as souls to incarnate 16 years apart so that when I was ready to step aside, you could step forward and Corelight would have a longer life and you could keep the teachings going. So what I see now is that Leslie's Leslie's sole purpose was to give birth to this amazing body of teachings, as you've experienced, Marge, with the Marriage of Spirit book and the teachings she gave at Tustin and all the courses she's put in place. That was her soul's purpose. And I know I've seen recently it's my soul's purpose to help make that more accessible. And so I'm currently working on some projects. There's some funders, some philanthropists who've stepped forward to help me. And we're starting to turn her teachings into short social media videos because most people aren't reading anymore. And so I've started creating these fun little animated videos that really illustrate the teachings beautifully. And I know that it'll make the teachings more accessible to more people.
This is such a beautiful story, and you will notice I did not go to Q&A. I was directed by Spirit to simply let it be in the flow, realizing that you and I have talked about the potential of an August call, which you have not gotten clarity on yet. And if you do get clarity on it, and we are able to do some work on the squares, one of the ones I'm interested in working on is squares on love. And the last picture in the email that you received was of that square, the square that I wrote in the 1990s. And it has a story, part of a love story in its own right. And it was the upper left square that is the desire for love, the reasons for attraction that pull us toward. It pulls us toward it. And you can look at that one square and know that there's a whole chapter on the squares, also on triangles in the book that Leslie wrote with Brad's assistance, Enlightened Living in Today's World. But also, the next book that they did was Returning to Oneness. And that book was revised, and another key was added. A life-changing eighth key was revealed. And then, of course, the book that Brad has alluded to several times, Living with Enlightenment, which is the story of a journey of love that he's talked about today. Brad, it has been so wonderful, so beautiful having you as a guest. And I hope that the August call comes together. We're working on it. And um, we'll figure out at some point in time, if that doesn't work, another point in time. Next month, our spotlight guest is going to be David Now, who lives half time or most of the time in India now. He was at Unity of Tustin for uh, many, many years. David and I, he calls himself Swami Brahmananda now, his spiritual name. But David and I co-taught East Meets West. And I talked about Western mysticism, and he talked about um, Eastern mysticism, and especially Siddha Yoga. And he was a student of Swami Muktananda. And so it's going to be an amazing interview next month. For those of you who are wanting to know how to support this platform, which is totally supported by Love Donation. You go on to one of our emails and simply click the button that says donate here. And so lots more to tell you, lots more to come. And thank you again, Brad. Oh my God, what a heart-rendering, heartwarming, beautiful love stories that you and Leslie have shared. Just incredible. And I'm so delighted that so many people were able to participate today. There will be replays, and uh, they will be available, and you'll be getting emails from us to get on our mailing list. Go to cultbyloveinstitute.com, and it will come up and you can see how to join our team. That's the way to get on the mailing list. We only do calls once a month. Don't overwhelm you with emails, but it is such a gift to be able to be in conversation with some of the most enlightened, amazing people of our time, people who are literally called to bridge the old paradigm and show us the way into the new paradigm. And Brad, you are one of them. So much love.
Marj, can I just say thank you so much? I'm so grateful to you for inviting me and allowing me to share. I don't get to share this story much. So I'm so grateful to you for the opportunity. And I love you and I honor you, your love and your wisdom and all the work you're doing. Thank you to you.
And keep in mind, you're invited to come to Kansas City.
Okay, you never know. I might take you
You
up on
never know.
that.
Much love, deep gratitude, and we'll see you next month, the third Wednesday of every month. Bye bye.